Hi everyone, my name is Amalia and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Reflect, Grow, Thrive. And my notes have just disappeared, so I am so sorry. I'm going to try and get those up again. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Reflect, Grow, Thrive. I'm so excited to be here tonight with our wonderful speakers. And tonight is powerful public speaking with impact, assertiveness, and communicating your message. And it's part of this webinar series hosted by YWCA in celebration of International Day of the Girl. Before we start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country that we're on. Though we're all meeting in this online space, we are all physically grounded on Aboriginal land. I myself, I'm joining from Palawa land of the Muwinina people in Nipaluna, Hobart. Tonight we'll be using the Q&A function, and I'd like to invite you all to share the lands that you're joining from in there if you'd like to. I'd also like to acknowledge the historic and ongoing injustices suffered by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the First Nations people of these lands, and pay my deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging. Warmly welcome anyone from the community who's joining us here tonight. So before we get stuck in, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to run you through. As I mentioned earlier, we will be using the Q&A function tonight. For those of you who don't know where it is, it should be at the bottom of your screen. There should be a little icon that you can click on and it will come up with a little chat function. Please pop any questions you've got in there. At the end of tonight's session, we'll have 15 minutes to go through them and hopefully we'll get through everyone's questions then. You'll notice we're actually recording tonight as well, and the recording we will be sharing about 2 weeks after the webinar series finished, so you can watch it back or pass it on to people who haven't been able to attend tonight. We would like to take a moment, or I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that some of the topics discussed in the Reflect, Grow, Thrive series might be sensitive and they might resonate with you in different ways. So if you do need to take a break at any time, please do so. Grab yourself a cup of tea, get a cup of coffee, step away from the computer, shake it all out, do what you've got to do. We do have the wonderful Beck and Amanda here as well behind the scenes. That was Amanda's voice that you heard earlier. They'll be monitoring the Q&A function for us tonight. So if you've got any issues, you can also message them through there. You can switch it to private and direct message through the Q&A function. And the last little bit that I wanted to tell you is that we will be sharing a survey on Friday. And we'd love if you could give us a couple of minutes of your time, give us a bit of feedback on any sessions that you attended. So I'm just going to take a really quick second to introduce myself. My name is Amalia. As I said, I'm a community development worker and artist based in Nipaluna, Hobart. I'm also a member of the Young Women's Council, and I'm so excited to be here tonight hosting this particular session because I'm a huge fan of the PIN and what that platform represents. So enough about me, it's time to talk about our guests, Lucy Cutting and Nkechi Anele, who are the founders and creators of the PIN, as well as formidably talented and experienced women in their own right. Lucy Cutting moved to Tasmania in 2014, becoming a radio producer and presenter for ABC Radio Hobart. Lucy has spoken at the Tasmanian Writers' Festival on the topic of racial and cultural questioning, and written for publications such as Island Magazine and Victorian Women's Trust. Nkechi Anele has spent over a decade in the Australian music industry as a lead singer in the band Sasquatch, touring and performing both nationally and internationally. Nkechi has lent herself to the stage, screen and radio, including Bree Lee's latest publication, Beauty and Letters of Love, and presenting Roots and All on Triple J. In 2015, they co-created The PIN, an online platform which explores race, identity and culture through story sharing. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Lucy and Nkechi. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Amalia.
So let's just jump straight in. Could you tell us more about what the PIN is? Obviously, I'm a huge fan. Some people might not know it that well. So could you tell us a little bit about what the PIN is and I guess what prompted you to create it as well?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll let Nkechi take that one. So what prompted us to create the pin kind of goes back to when we first met. Lucy and I actually met working together. We didn't realize that we had similar cultural backgrounds until maybe a couple of months into working together, when we were actually we're working in a library and we were both checking in books at the same time, and somebody mentioned Nigerian hair, and then it was kind of like for the next hour, if not longer, we were just like, oh my God, have you used this product? What do you do when this happens? Talking about like what it was like for us growing up. And that conversation around race and identity followed us into our 20s and was really formidable in the way that we kind of came into our own identities as young women in their 20s, like working out how to go through life, and if things were unique to our experience because we were biracial. Lucy and I also lived together at a time, and then Lucy moved to Tasmania, where we still had these conversations, but they were a lot different because of the different ways in which Tasmania and Melbourne in particular are diverse, and the conversations that people have around diversity and race. Around that time as well, I was reading a book called Mixed, which was written by an American author, and for the first time I was reading about the experience of being biracial actually written out, instead of trying to bring together two identities into one. And Lucy and I just kept having these really in-depth conversations, and saying to each other, I wish there was a resource that we had outside of ourselves to find out if our experience is just unique to us, or if this is like something that's experienced by people around Australia. Like, are there different ways of looking at identity that we don't know of? And so Lucy came up with the idea to start the website, and we then got extremely excited and had heaps of conversations about what we wanted to do. Weirdly, like one of the things that we wanted to do through the pin was to broaden our own horizons. And we had this very big realization that for both of us, like our friendship's probably the strongest and probably most prominent relationship we had with like a person of color. And so we wanted to get more into the community of that and the discussions around that. So then we, over a lot of different discussions, and me flying to Tasmania when I was touring with Sasquatch, I would hang out at Lucy's house, and in her front lounge room, we literally came up with that we wanted to meet people, which is why we have a meet section. And we really didn't like the idea of how multiculturalism and diversity had just been painted across such a huge range of people that probably didn't have anything in common except for maybe the color of the skin, or the fact they weren't born in this country, or a parent wasn't born in this country, or things like that. And so we really hated that idea of like lumping people of difference together under this banner of diversity and multiculturalism. So we wanted people to meet people as the individual and learn from their individual experiences and outlooks on life, as we had done with each other. We created Think because we wanted people to write pieces and really put some thought to issues that affect us on a daily, on the day-to-day or politically. And we had another section called, I don't even remember what it was called. Express. It's changed a lot. That's kind of been like a active space. But initially we wanted to highlight artists because I was like an very active musician, wanting to highlight like the creative industries and also coming, like Lucy and I are both first generations on one side of the family. There's a lot of like expectations to do certain things. And so I guess in that respect, linking to how much we love art and creativity as a form of expression, we wanted to have a space like that as well for other people, to seek out other people like them. Because I'm not sure about Lucy, but definitely for myself, it took me until my 20s to find other creative people who had diverse and really interesting cultural heritage and background to my own. And I always felt like a bit of a weirdo that liked art when the expectation was to be like a lawyer or an accountant or like something sensible. So that's how we got started. And then I know Lucy will tell you about how we got to the name of it, but we just started emailing people. We made a list of who we would love to speak to and just started stalking their information off the net and emailing them with a really clear idea and a really clear vision. And as soon as we got somebody, we were really lucky to get Uncle Jack Charles and Omar bin Musa, the poet. As soon as we got their names, we when we sent emails out to other people, we said, well, we've already got these people involved, and it kind of snowballed from there. And then the conversation really evolved as we evolved with learning how to interview people and to be more comfortable to have these conversations about race, identity, and culture under an Australian umbrella.
That's amazing. Thank you. So as you were talking, I was just like, oh my goodness, so much of this resonates with me, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening as well. And you mentioned, and I'm just going to pass straight to you, Lucy, the name. Like, how did you get there? I love the story, and I think everyone else will really resonate with it as well.
Yeah, we did throw a lot of names out there. So I think the thing with naming something that is discussing race, culture, and identity is we didn't want it to explicitly say that, because by saying that you're kind of pigeonholing the conversation that you're having on the website. So we did talk about names that included, you know, mixed like us and things like that, but it just didn't feel right because it just felt like it was creating a conversation before a conversation could even happen. So the name, I can't even exactly remember, but we were just talking names and throwing them up in the air. And then I said, hey, what about the pin? Because, you know, you're pinpointing a topic, you're putting a pin on a map as well of where you're from or where you're supposed to be from, I guess. So it kind of resonated in a lot of different ways. And it just felt like such a great fit because it wasn't explicitly saying this is what this website is about. But when you actually think about the conversations that happen on the website and the topics that we've brought up and the identities that we've explored, the name actually makes a lot of sense. So it was a long conversation, but the minute we had the name, we knew it was the right name. And I remember Nkechi and I just kind of saying, oh my gosh, this is it. That's the name, the pin. That is the name. And yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I just love that. And I also think like a lot of the conversations that you're having on the pin are kind of, you know, they're prompted by this kind of question of where are you from? You know, I feel like, you know, myself as someone from mixed heritage, like that's a question I get a lot as well. And I know a lot of my other friends that are, you know, people of color, that is the question that we get asked. And so like having a really kind of nice way to sum that up and create a conversation point from that by creating the title, the pin, without explicitly referencing it. I love it. I think it's so awesome. Like hats off to you. It's so cool. Nkechi, you were talking before about how you got started, I suppose. So like, you know, stalking people, getting those like name dropping, emailing people. You spoke about as well, you mentioned like having a really clear idea, I guess, of like how you approach those people. So I guess like once you had the idea, once you wanted to start approaching people, like how did you get to that point of like clarity and having that clear point?
Well, I think one of the great things about Lucy and I think a really great thing about our friendship is that when we brainstorm ideas, we both come to it with really different experiences, but we're also very strong-minded. And I don't mean that in an argumentative sense. I mean that in a way that we can say, no, that really doesn't work. And we respect each other enough to believe that. So we had a massive discussion about what did we actually want to get out of this? And we actually wrote 100 questions that we've always wanted to ask people. And we kind of went through them and were asking each other them and then got slightly traumatized and thought, let's reel this back. What do we really want to know? And what have we gained from people? And the thing that we had really loved about each other was the fact that we had, so that Lucy's mother and my father are both Nigerian, but from different ethnic groups within Nigeria, and both our opposing parent is white. With that being said, I grew up in the city, and I grew up being the only black child in my class, whereas Lucy grew up in the country and was a part of like the only black family where she grew up. So we had all these different experiences as well, with me being the oldest child in my family and Lucy being the youngest, and talking about the different ways in which we saw the world the things that kind of annoyed us when we were younger, and how they've been really strong and key to our identity and our strengths as we've gotten older. And I think it was those conversations where we came to each other with really different opinions that we felt that we'd really learned a lot from. So we decided that that's what we wanted from people. We didn't want to leave people that we interviewed feeling down or feeling worn out. We wanted them to feel really empowered about their identity, because we found that with each other. And so we wanted to learn what it was like for them growing up in Australia. We also had questions around the Australian identity, being of a multinational background and not belonging to this land. It was a point of interest for us. Like, what does it mean to be Australian, and what does it look like? And so those were the questions that we really started off with. When it came to a clear idea, we, like with all cultures, the pin was ever evolving. So we started off wanting to talk about the biracial experience, and then realized that it's not just limited to being biracial, it's multiracial, multinational, multicultural things that impact a person's identity. That impact the person's identity. So when we were talking to people, I think what really helped, and I know this is probably going to be weird to say, but it really did help with people that we hadn't met, that, like, my name is very ethnic looking in our emails, but also that we had this really clear idea of, we don't want to talk about what it's like to be Black or white or come from an Asian or English second language descent. We want to know what it's like to be you and what's helped form your identity. And we also said to the people that we initially asked, when we do this interview, we're going to write it out and we're going to send it back to you for final confirmation, so that whatever we publish to our website is true to your experience of the interview. And I think that's really important. Because I had come from an experience of being interviewed so much from being in a band and seeing my words twisted to make a good story. We didn't want that for anybody else to go through, especially with something as sensitive as race, culture, and identity, and putting a face and a name behind that in Australia at the time when we were having all these conversations about social politics.
Yeah, and I think that's it shouldn't be refreshing, but it is such a refreshing take on actually presenting people's stories, because yeah, you're right, so often those words can be twisted and they can be presented in a completely different way. And the kind of the model that you have both come up with the pin is essentially kind of giving that power back to the person and giving them that agency over their own story, but kind of helping them craft that message, which I just think is so powerful and so incredible. And Nkechi, you mentioned, like, you know, you're both very strong-minded, and you know, you've been friends obviously for a really, really long time, and, you know, prior to starting the pin as well. So I guess, like, what I'm really interested in is, like, you know, being friends and having that pre-existing relationship. How do you go about, like, working together and managing those expectations and balancing things with that pre-existing relationship behind?
Well, I think because we had the pre-existing relationship, we've always had a lot of respect for each other. But in the early days, I think when we started, we were so excited and passionate and energized by it that we were, you know, sending out dozens of emails, doing heaps of interviews each week, thinking about events and starting to approach the idea of having events as well. Of course, Nkechi being based in Melbourne, you know, we hosted an event in Melbourne, and I kind of flew over, and it was this kind of mad experience where I literally worked, I think, about 48 hours straight, because at the time I had 2 jobs, had a daytime job and a nighttime job. And so I just went straight from my daytime job onto a plane, flew back to my daytime job, then went to my nighttime job. And I think I slept maybe about 4 hours. And so we were just pushing ourselves so hard because we were so excited by it. But it did reach a point where we had to say to each other, hey, we need boundaries. We need to have the conversations where we're friends and the conversations where we're running the pin. And we need to know when those conversations are happening. So there would be certain days of the week where we would, this is in the early days, where we would talk about pin specific stuff. And also actually communicating in various ways. So kind of saying, hey, this is a pin message. Hey, this is just a message, you know, friendship wise. That has always been really important. And I would say, like, you know, we kind of loosely continued to follow that, but it changed. And you know, depending on our availability and busyness, that those conversations changed. I think like it's also been a tricky experience of navigating through different periods of time where one of us has been more busy, say Nkechi's been touring, or I've just been really busy with work or something, where we've had to navigate that too. So it's always been a conversation, I guess, of respect and clarity and being honest about our availability. It definitely did get to a point where Nkechi had to say, hey, I'm just not mentally available for this right now, but I will be at another date. And so that's always been really, really important, I think.
Yeah. Sometimes one of the things that we didn't realize was that once you get started on this, it's really hard to stop talking about it, because it already was a part of our life, but it wasn't like an active part. And sometimes even without intending to, it's really hard to switch off. So being able to say that to each other, I think, has been really, really important to not only maintaining the pin, but just like maintaining our friendship and not being like spiteful or not. Yeah. Which is a really hard thing, because when it's a friendship as well, like this website was kind of our baby that we made. Although I'm laughing at this now because I'm like, you actually have a baby. But like at the time, before real babies existed in certain people's lives, this was kind of like our friendship baby. And so we were like co-parenting this interstate, and also having completely separate lives. So yeah, being able to be honest with each other kind of stops really big arguments and miscommunications later down the track.
Yeah, and I mean, that's just so incredible, I think, for the both of you, that you've come to that point and you can have that clarity of communication and can be really clear about borders and boundaries. And obviously that's like key for both of you to be able to be healthy and happy within yourselves, but also to keep doing that work that you're doing, which is so incredibly important. And I really want to talk now about, because I really love how you're both kind of talking about, you know, in the early days and how it has grown since, you know, you first started it. Because it has been 5 years. I mean, you started it in 2015, which is incredible. Like, it's a 5-year-old baby.
Yeah.
Which is super exciting. And I guess like you've spoken a little bit about the changes that you've had, you know, kind of within the pin, but I wonder, are there changes that you've noticed, I guess, in the wider industry? Or like, you know, do you think that there's been progress in the types of diversity and storytelling platforms that are available, I mean, broadly to Australia, but particularly because we're talking about International Day of the Girl, we're at the Y, you know, for young women of colour, do you think that there's been progress in that space that you've been kind of pushing for in a while?
I think progress is a tricky word to place on it. I don't know if I'd call it progress, but I would say that the space has definitely changed. I think that more and more mainstream media is hungry for diverse stories, but also now is hungry for diverse talent, not just the story. So I guess what I feel like I'm seeing more opportunities for people to talk about things that aren't just related to their identity, but possibly their identity ties into it. Yeah, so I definitely think that there's a bit more of a hunger for it. And I think there's also a bit more of a pushback by audiences requesting diversity, you know, diversity in film, diversity in radio, across all different types of media. So the progress is there, but I would struggle to say that it's the progress that I would hope for, in a sense. I think that we're in this kind of funny stage now where, yes, diversity is coming into mainstream media, but mainstream media doesn't necessarily know how to navigate diverse stories in a respectful way. And so you are seeing, you know, names not getting pronounced correctly and repeatedly. And when people call out on it, they actually get pushback from audiences and also a bit of pushback from media. Like, why do you care so much? It's just a name, kind of thing. And, you know, we really have to be careful with how we navigate these stories, because we need to make sure that that talent feels comfortable to continue to interact with more mainstream media, so that we can actually explore these stories and get beyond just exploring, you know, the initial story of identity or something, but also how that interacts with every facet of somebody's identity, be it their professional identity or their cultural identity, all of those kinds of things. So yeah, I feel like there's a change, definitely.
And
yeah,
sorry, it's like a change for the positive, it seems. Like, Nkechi, would you agree?
Well, yeah, we're moving away from stereotyping. I think that's a really important thing. I think, unfortunately, Australian media doesn't really show how diverse Australia is. And that is changing, because now it's almost ludicrous not to be diverse in the stories that you tell. I think as well, there's a generation that came before us where there were people who were extremely brave for telling their stories. And now we're reaching a point, the ideal is for it not to be brave, for people to be able to speak up about their stories. It should be that there's a empathy and understanding for cultural and like cultural difference. And I feel like it is overall, like on a global level, happening, even within like the movement of women and showing the complexity of who women are. And I think that's what we're kind of wanting when it comes to stories of diversity. It's not like a story of what it's like to be Black, Asian, Hispanic, like anything apart from white. It's the story of of like, who is the person, and the cultural and ethnical things come second, but they're accurate, instead of these like idealized things being written about people with no actual cultural currency to draw from.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good insightful way of looking into that. And I guess like on that, I guess in an ideal world, you know, that's definitely where we would be, that it would be looking at the value of someone's individual experience that is not guided by quite often a misinformed understanding of their race or ethnicity. That's not the linchpin of their identity. It's a facet, but it's not the only thing. I'm really interested as well in the fact that I guess the PIN, which is kind of this incredible platform, it's been running for 5 years, you know, that really started because the two of you kind of had this connection and kind of got a grasp on your own personal story as well. And I wonder, you know, because again, it's International Day of the Girl, we're with the Y. I wonder if there's advice that you could give to young women about crafting their own personal stories, or, you know, starting that process of reflection and seeing, you know, how do I go about telling my story? What is my story?
I think that that's such an important question that you've just posed at the end there, Amalia, because it's about, I think, identifying what the story is that you want to tell about yourself or whatever topic you're exploring in relation to yourself. I think that Nkechi and I have been really lucky in that we founded something where we were able to explore who we are in the background of creating what the PIN is now. So the conversations that we had really helped shape how we feel about ourselves now, I feel. So I think, if you're somebody who's keen to get into a space where you are storytelling, it's about figuring out, what is the story I want to tell? Who are the people I want to tell the story to? Am I going to write the story, or is someone else going to write the story for me? And do I trust them with my story? Who are the audience that I want to reach as well? Do I want to reach an audience that reflects who I feel I am, or do I want to reach the audience who I feel like I need to educate? So I guess there's a lot of layers to it. And I think, you know, sometimes I get people approaching me because they want to be interviewed by the PIN specifically, because they want to have a certain type of interview experience, and they also want to reach a certain type of audience as well. So I think that's so important. Like, are you speaking to a mainstream media organization for a certain reason, or just because you feel like, oh wow, this mainstream media organization approached me, I have to say yes, like it's mainstream media? I think that's such an important part of it. Like, don't get completely wowed by the people approaching you. Remember that they're approaching you, and that they obviously want your story. What would you say, Nkechi? I'm interested to hear.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I would say totally agree. Like, we've had so many moments of realization about our own identity and how much it changes. And that's another thing. It is totally allowed to change. You could start off with an idea of who you are and be completely transformed throughout the process of writing that down. Going on with what Lucy said, I think what we're really saying is, like, if you are approached about your story or to share your story, even within like working and organizations, I've had that happen with like diversity classes, which we kind of all know are not really for people like us, but that willingness to talk about your experience doesn't mean that you need to relive your trauma for somebody else's benefit to give them empathy. You are allowed to say no in doing that as well. And one of the things, like, I know that mentally Lucy and I have this down from doing a lot of panels and talking to people and being interviewed, is that we have our boundaries. We know what our boundaries are in conversation and what we want to say and what we think is private, and that is also based on from person to person. I know, like, I'm really kind of, I could tell you everything, all the naughty gritty details of stuff, but but I've made a blood oath, so I can't. No, but I also know how taxing that is, and you also need to be aware of that. I thought with my training, being interviewed for music, that talking about myself, being like a natural diva, would be really easy and comfortable, whereas I felt, especially within this space, when you're talking about cultural knowledge and wealth and trying to explain to people, especially if you have been a victim of any form of oppressive system, and trying to explain why you're an equal and why you should be respected to a group of people can be extremely taxing. So it's good to know why you're doing something, and also that you have worth. I think that's one of the most empowering things that the PIN has given Lucy and I, is understanding that the PIN doesn't give people a voice. The people already have a voice. We're just having a conversation in a very safe space, and that's what the PIN provides. But yeah, you always have a voice, and it's up to you who you want to lend it to, and it's in your power to do that, not anybody else's.
Thank you. Yeah. That's so many good points. It's like actually hard to know where to start to kind of feed that back to you. But thank you so much to both of you, because I think that there's a lot of really fantastic pointers for people starting out in that journey, and really important questions to ask ourselves as well about boundaries, particularly. I think that's such an important one. I think, I'm really aware that, it's almost question time, and I want to sneak in 2 more questions. One of them is about the fact, and Nkechi, you actually mentioned, you've got a lot of training in public speaking, particularly, as you said, a bit of a diva. It's something that comes naturally, but also, like, you both have a lot of training in this. And I wonder, if you had one lesson that you can impart, each of you, I guess, what's your biggest public speaking lesson that you could pass on to everyone that's here tonight?
Wow.
Just one. Sorry.
I still struggle with public speaking. I may be able to present radio, and I've definitely had moments where I've sat in a radio studio and pressed live and thought, there are thousands of people listening to me, but for some weird reason this makes me less nervous than standing in a room of even 10 people. I think with public speaking, just, having, I guess, pacing yourself is so important for me. I think just allow yourself to slow down. If you're getting nervous, just slow down and refocus and breathe. For me, that is 100% what is going to get me through public speaking experiences. But also having notes, but not having a full answer written out as well. So trust your knowledge. There's a reason why somebody has chosen somebody to do a talk. So trust your knowledge, have your notes as a guide, breathe, and just slowly get through it is what has really helped me in moments where I've had to speak in public.
Yeah, I found the best experience I had was when when we had our first panel where Lucy and I were moderating at Splendor in the Grass 3 years ago. I was on a panel beforehand and I was extremely nervous because the people there were like lawyers and musicians who had had far bigger careers than I had. And Stella Donnelly actually gave me this, and I've always kept it with me. She actually goes on to panels with a notepad and pen so that she can write her ideas down so that she doesn't forget them, because sometimes somebody will be talking and it will spark something like a memory for you or like a conversation point that you really want to bring up, and then when it comes to you, your ideas might be a bit all over the place. And especially for someone like myself, sometimes I can have like a very big delay point between someone saying something really important and me realizing how important that is. And I found that if I write notes, I can see how the conversation is flowing and maintain that. But I think as well, one of the best things is just practice. And I know sometimes this sounds really stupid to do, but my mum used to make me practice in front of her, like having conversations when it was going for work, or like standing up in front of a mirror. I know that sounds really weird to do, but like through singing, I learned I had to sing sing facing myself. It kind of gets rid of that feeling of, oh my God, I'm standing on stage and people are staring at me, because you have this awareness of how you look. And so you don't have to worry about that energy anymore. But yeah, definitely have a notepad.
Yeah, and don't be nervous about making silly little mistakes. You know, say the microphone doesn't work properly the first time, or you get some feedback. That's an icebreaker. I find that that's like the best thing to break the ice. So yeah, make sure your microphone doesn't work.
So a notepad and a microphone that doesn't work. That's the takeaway. The great point is, no, they actually. Thank you so much. Okay. Last question, and then I'm going to squeeze in because I've got some really wonderful questions that I really want to ask you both from some of the people that are here. But I would like to know, because I know there's some things in the works, what does the future look like for the Pin? What's on the radar?
Don't know.
I think always more events and trying to delve into podcasting a bit. I think both Nkechi and I are radio people. We're very much sound people. So it's amazing that we haven't delved into the world of podcasts as of yet. Some of the stories when we meet people would be amazing podcasts, and being able to hear a story in somebody's actual voice, I think, is a really special thing. So yeah, podcasting.
Yeah, so exciting. Okay, so are you both ready for some questions? Because there's some really awesome ones. Okay, cool. The first one I'm going to ask you, is, I'm just going to read it out. I hope that's okay with everyone. I'm from a very patriarchal cultural background, and I'm aiming to work in youth development and women's rights. There are so many challenges to do that in the kind of society that we have. What kind of advice could you give to those women who are trying to be heard in that kind of society? It's a big one.
That is a big one.
That is a huge one. I wasn't expecting something like that. So first of all, I would say, stay, without sounding like a Dolly magazine, and I hope that doesn't age me too badly, but I think stay true to yourself. And I had this amazing conversation with my mum today, actually. She was talking about what it's like to enter into your 50s and 60s, and the advice that she got as she was growing up. She said the best advice that she was ever given is have no regrets as you age. So sometimes it is really hard when you grow up in a very patriarchal or in a system or even a culture or a cultural heritage practice that doesn't align with your way of thinking or in the way that the world has evolved to see women and men. I think what you need to do, or what I would do, is I'm a very stubborn person, so I would just do what I want to do anyway. But have those discussions with people in your family to let them know your standpoint on this. And if you feel it so strongly that you can't think of anything else to do, I think you should definitely be passionate and be involved in it. I think people get really mixed up with the idea of culture, that it's this very static, traditional thing that's like ingrained and it will never change. And that's just not true, because we're a globe of immigrating people and culture is fluid. And I think people need to respect that for culture to continue to grow, it needs to evolve with each generation of people. And I feel like there's probably a really nurturing and a big wealth of knowledge that you can bring to your own bring to whatever practice that you're doing because of your culture or because of that patriarchal system. Maybe it's having empathy for people who are in a similar situation to yourself, and knowing how they feel and to be there for them. But that's, yeah, a really hard question to answer. I think when you say patriarchal system as well, sorry to talk a lot about this, but I think especially being a woman, and being a person of color, something that I've really realized, and I think the strength of Lucy and my friendship is that we really support each other. We don't even have to ask the other person for support. We just ask the other person to be a soundboard for things when we have an idea. And that has given us the strength of not having those negative thoughts about ourselves before someone says it, which I think is a very practice thing that women in particular do, and women of color, where we say, oh, we won't be allowed to do that because and no one's actually said it to you. You've said it to yourself. So I think bear that in mind, and also realize that when someone says no, that doesn't mean that's the end of something. That just might mean that you need to find a new direction for it. And yeah, that's the only wisdom that I can give you. I hope it works. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Yeah, I think having conviction in what you want to achieve, and knowing that's what you need to achieve to be happy is really important. I think also we have had people write anonymous articles for the Pin because they felt that they couldn't fully publicly embrace what they were trying to say, even though they felt it very strongly. And so if there's opportunities where you can achieve what you need to achieve on the down low until you're confident enough to proceed with it in a public way, I think that's always a good approach too, if it needs to be the approach that you take before you can actually publicly move in the direction that you want to.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. That was a really hard question to start off with, but you both, I loved your answers. They're fantastic. So the next one that I've got here, someone's very kindly said, hanging off every word, thank you. I'd love to know if either of you have a personal approach or technique that you like to use when exploring your personal stories. How can you sense when you found something that actually would be helpful to share?
Oh, because I haven't been able to find it anywhere else. That's when I know that I found something. When I was pregnant and had my baby, I really craved some literature or experiences by women of color, and I just couldn't find it. And so I wrote about my experience, and I've had so many people send me messages and say, that piece that you wrote really resonated with me. Even I wrote it last year, and I still get those messages. I had one just a couple of months ago. And so it's when you know that you can't find it anywhere else, and there's a reason why it doesn't exist, and you know that it needs to happen. So yeah.
Sometimes it's also like seeing stories similar, maybe about similar backgrounds, spoken about like your experience, but they've missed a certain element of it. There's always like little niches that maybe are specific to your experience that you can always talk about, but you don't have to be like extremely unique for you to stand out. I think as well, people think I need to tell the one story that has never been told in the history of time, whereas actually just being really honest about your experience, like Lucy was saying, really draws out people who maybe weren't brave enough or had the right words to express what comes to you quite naturally.
Yeah. Thank you.
I also just find writing is a really soothing process sometimes. So it doesn't necessarily, like Nkechi's saying, it doesn't necessarily need to be the biggest story ever, but if it's just a soothing thing to get that information out there, and people are receptive to it, then that's also completely worthy.
Yeah, there's value in that too. Absolutely. Thank you. So the next question is from Billy, who says, thank you so much for sharing your origin story. It's so interesting to hear about how the pin was birthed. I'd love to get your top tips on being a moderator or interviewing someone. How do you listen intently and allow someone to have their space while also guiding the process to achieve your specific goals? There's such tension.
The first moderation that we did, I've actually got a really short attention span, and I had to eat grapes to stop me from like being distracted, because I would try and get Lucy's attention, be like, hey Lucy, look, we're sitting on stage, like a 5-year-old.
That is entirely true. I was actually kind of going, stop it.
Like, shut up. One of the things that we've learned, and we've learned this the hard way, but kind of got away with it, but basically we produced something that wasn't to our standard of how we wanted our first thing to go. I would say we've got there's a really great article in Meet where Lucy spoke to Mark Fennell about what is the best things to learn about interviewing a person. And I think this applies to being a moderator. When you're moderating people in a group, it's really good to do research on them. And it's not just look at their Wikipedia page or look at their website to see what they've written. Go on their Twitter, go on their social media, because you'll actually get a essence of who the person really, really is, what their likes and dislikes are, what they're passionate about. And I think in knowing the people who you have on your panel, it makes it easier to guide a conversation, especially sometimes when you have like stagnant things, when you ask an open question and no one wants to go first. We also, when we did our talk for Splendor, we did all this research, but also I'd sat on a panel with one of our guests who had spoken about mental health issues. And so I was able to say to Lucy, like, this might come up, just so that we're prepared for this. But we did like a lot of research, and then kind of threw the research away and talked about what the conversation we wanted to have. You want your moderation to feel like an open conversation that people are privy to. And so we wanted to make it feel like a conversation for the people sitting there and not like an interrogation. And I think that's really important. You're also allowed to share things as a moderator to help people feel at ease. Again, you don't have to overshare or feel like you're putting yourself in an extremely vulnerable position. But I think through the pin, we've learnt that like that essence of humanity that we all have is a really beautiful leveling field when it comes to letting people open up. You can say what your opinion is about something, or from my experience, I learned this. Is this the same for you? And that is a good way to kind of open a conversation. How about you, Luce? What do you think?
I find interviewing for me is a really visual experience. So I kind of visualize where I want the interview to start and where I want it to end up. And it is completely visual. I see different pathways that can open up in a conversation. I try to avoid asking questions where I know the answer, unless I specifically know that that answer being part of the conversation is important to a later question that I have. And like Nkechi was saying, I think it's so important to research so deeply that you are confident about your knowledge about the person, the people that you're interviewing, or if you're moderating a panel, the group of people. And so confident, but also comfortable. So comfortable in the knowledge that you can pull stuff from your own memory about things that they've previously said or done that will really add to the interview experience. And I think it's just so important to know where you want the interview to end up. Do you want it to end up on a kind of intense point of conversation? Do you want it to end up lightly? Do you want it to end up sad? You know, there's all these ways that an interview can end. So knowing where you want to start and end, I think, is really important to creating what you're trying to create and curating it properly. Is this the end of the interview? Because that's perfect for that.
Well, I was going to say, like, we also have talked to people before when we've moderated, and say, this is the direction that we feel the conversation will go, and this is where we want to take it. So they're not surprised from that. Sometimes like we've even said to people, we've got like a few questions that we have got written down, we have thought about, and we'd like to direct them to you. This is even before the panel started, just so they have it in the back of their mind, so that they don't feel like when they're on stage and nervous energy comes to play, they don't feel like we're kind of snipering them with a question and they have to come up with the answer on the spot. We give them like a really good amount of time to answer those specific questions, and I think through doing that, it also helps them bring up their wealth of knowledge for the conversation at hand.
And also, if there's a question that you're unsure as to whether they're comfortable with you asking, I always check, because I think it's so important to establish an amount of trust between the guests and the moderator, just so that they know that you have their back, that you're not just out there trying to get some, snappy quotes from them or kind of shock them, but that you actually want to have a good conversation.
Yeah, I think that's Billy said, okay, got it. Visualization, trust, research, and grapes. Really appreciate it.
Grapes are the secret weapon. They work, they really do. Chewing and nodding makes you sound like it physically looks like you're actively listening.
It's a trick here tonight.
Yeah.
You told me earlier, Nkechi. No, I've been listening, I promise. I think we've got time for one more question. I want to be really, respectful, because I know that it's getting a little bit late for us on the Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to squeeze one more question and then we'll just wrap up. So this question, it might be a little bit of a difficult one to answer. I think it's kind of the stage that you're at as well. So let's see if we can do it quickly. No pressure. No. So the question is, I'd love to know what advice you give someone who is looking to break out in podcasting and get noticed. With so many people doing this now, what are some ways to stand out? And I guess that's kind of where you're at potentially at the moment. So I guess, are there any reflections that you've had or insights that you've had in your journey for that?
We're kind of like approaching it the same way that we were with the pin. We've been talking about what we think were really interesting points that we wish we could hear on a podcast, and we're doing our research at the moment, thinking about the podcasts that we really love and why we love them. I think when you're creating something, if your aim is to create something that gets across to people, If your aim is to be popular, I think that's when you get into trouble. If your aim is really in the practice of creating good content, that's when people come to you. We've made no attempt to like be popular or be the popular opinion on race, identity and culture in Australia, but we have made it a very big mission to be true to the people that we represent and to go there with some stories into spaces that are not talked about in a public forum. So I guess it depends on what you're coming into the podcast with. And I think as well, that also comes down to feeling that your voice is good enough. And I think that's a lot of people who actually have really amazing stories and really great voices to share tend to be the ones that don't think that they're good enough, and the loudmouths with no opinions and nothing really that important to share are the ones that tend to do it really loudly. So I think it's having self-confidence and enjoying the journey of creating and having like knowing why you're creating a podcast, because it is a trend at the moment. It's like, why do you think this is really important for you to do now? Is it to like upskill? Is it to be more confident in talking? Because you will get that from doing a podcast and listening to yourself back. Is it to create important content that you feel is missing? I think you really need to think about those things. Yeah. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah, I agree. I think also if you can get some experience in seeing how stories are crafted, I think that can be really helpful, seeing how other people put stories together and edit stories, edit music in, all of that kind of stuff. Because I know that from working in radio, I would have approached podcasting very differently prior to working in radio. So if there's a local community radio station where you can volunteer a few hours and see how people put things together, I think that can be really helpful to learning how to do podcasts. I think also actually edit your podcast. So don't expect it to just be an interview top and tailed, so edited at the start and the end. Like, actually edit it and move questions around if you need to and make it good quality, because that goes a long way as a listener.
Yeah. Don't Joe Rogan it where you're just two people talking shit for an hour to 2 hours. No one wants to hear that. It's been done.
And that is the advice that we'll end on. I love that. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight, and especially thank you, Lucille and Nkechi. You've shared so much with us and so much expertise and insight, and I think that there are so many things that everyone that's listening in today can take away, and lots of good tips, especially about podcasting.
Thank you.
So thank you both so much. If anyone has any additional questions, you can reach out to the YWCA Australia team by contacting via email, giving@ywca.org.au. And don't forget that Reflect, Grow, Thrive webinars are running for the rest of this week. The next session is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's called People Power, and it's all about getting into advocacy and activism. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking a chunk of time out of your evening to join us. It's been so lovely to be here with you all, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.